exams, but definitely that would be very helpful for you. So today's lecture is, the way the course has been structured is that we would be having an international perspective about what's happening around the world, and from tomorrow onwards we'll be focusing specifically on India in terms of the developments, the way the law and environmental jurisprudence has developed. So today I will be talking about the importance of specialized environmental judiciary, the concept of which we earlier discussed, access to justice is very important, and why should specialized judiciary play an important role, and some of the examples taken around the world as to what sort of environmental courts and tribunals are existing around the globe, and what lessons can be learned in this regard. So I'll just go and start with my lecture. Bear with me. So if you see the topic of it, it talks about specialized environmental courts and tribunals, an international perspective. Just recapping as to what we had done or what we have been doing in the last 2 days. Environmental justice is an important element not only for the protection of rule of law, not only for transparency, accountability, but also ensuring that people's rights are being protected. And therefore, it's very important that we have certain frameworks that really speak out about what is environmental justice. And if you recap, I talked about four or five frameworks. The first one was about distributional framework, where we are questioning distributional equity, environmental good or environmental harm, and how it impacts on the lives of the people, how it impacts on communities. The second one we talked about was recognitional framework, which essentially is about recognizing the ability and the capabilities of individuals and communities as special groups which would be affected as a consequence of environmental degradation. For example, pollution, and how environmental degradation impacts on the lives of women, children, disabled people. The third one which we talked about was procedural framework, which essentially is about formal or informal institutions that try to impart environmental justice. And as I said, the focus of this course is going to be on the procedural part, with formal institutions coming into play. The fourth one was ecological framework, where we talked about it's simply not about humans. It is also about nature or non-humans and how they have to be integrated within that system. And the last one was abolishing framework, where we were questioning the race as an issue, particularly when we focus it on USA, where I talked about that how black people were affected as a consequence of environmental degradation. So these were some of the frameworks which we discussed on the first day. But as I said, we will be focusing on specialized environmental courts and tribunals, which is basically the procedural part of it. Today I'll start with an international perspective. Judiciary throughout the world is considered as the bedrock of any society. Justice Veera Mantri from Sri Lanka really stressed importance of the undisputed integrity and the reverence that the judiciary has in terms of environmental compliance. Judiciary in the developing countries plays a very important role. It is very, I would not like to use the word judicial activism. Somehow I have this connotation, it has a negative connotation, but I think I would like to use the word judiciary is proactive. Because the moment you talk about activism, there is always the element of subjectivity that comes up. But proactive is looking into the laws and trying to implement it in the spirit of what the legislation is talking about. But having said that, it is very difficult to maintain the distinction between judicial activism and judiciary being proactive. But I would really stress on a proactive judiciary. And the reason why I say that is that in developing, as I earlier said, developed world and developing countries are very different in their approaches. In the developed world, the judiciary is very conservative. It just doesn't open up so easily as what we see in the developing countries. And probably there are three reasons to it. I was talking to Professor Amandeep on this issue just before we started the talk. And there are three issues to it. One, the legislations that are drafted in the developed world are very stringent. Right? There is no gaps. The second is implementation is also very strict. And the third are awareness which people have in that regard. Whether it is a deterrent effect, whether it is an initiative which people take, that's something, where people are conscious about environment. But this is not to say that everyone is, but there's a general feel I can talk about, particularly from Europe, that there is. And I can just quote one example from there. When I left India, 16, 17 years back, when I went there, during Christmas time, now Christmas is really around the corner, nearly all the food was non-vegetarian. Everything except some of the, vegetables or something the sides. But today, 30% of the food on the shelves is vegetarian or vegan. And this is more driven not by the older generation, but by younger generation like you. There's a lot happening in Europe through younger generation taking the initiative in environmental and climate change matters. So the point which I was making was, once people become aware of their responsibilities, once people are aware of their actions, there is a lot of change that can be brought about in that regard. But in the developing countries, I think the situation is very different. And there are certain inherent gaps in the legislation which makes the lawyers exploit the same. And that is why we are a very litigious society all the time. There's a huge lot of litigation taking place. We are very proud of the fact that standing has been, relaxed, but relaxation of standing also comes with certain challenges. Your caseload is increasing heavily. In the West, standing is unless and until you really have an interest and the litigation is so hugely expensive, you can't go to the court. But here we interrelate it with human rights, we talk about our rights, and we try to give a very expanded meaning to this term. And that is why, if you ask people, if you ask the society, you always get a feel that out of the three organs of the state, even today, peoples will still prefer judiciary over the two other organs. And that is why Justice Veera Mantri has said it is the bedrock institution of our developing countries. So judiciary plays a very important role, and in environmental matters, specialized judiciary plays an equally important role because of the nature of the disputes that are involved. Let me make a statement, which is environmental matters are complex, polycentric, transnational, and often political in nature. So when they are polycentric, complex, transnational, multidisciplinary, and above all political in nature, it is very difficult for a generalized judiciary to adjudicate on those matters. And that is why there is a lot of emphasis at the international level to make sure that we have a specialized environmental adjudicatory process in existence. If you look to Agenda 21, it's talking about we need to improve our legal and institutional frameworks that are capable of dealing with environmental problems. So if we have to do that, we need to bring about specialism. Similarly, the 2002 Global Judges Symposium, which laid down the Johannesburg Principles, also insists upon the fact that we need to strengthen our judges, particularly in terms of their understanding about these environmental issues. And this is not only confined to the judges, but it's also confined to the prosecutors, legislators, and lawyers. What you argue in the court is what the result you get ultimately. And I think it's very important for the lawyers to transcend their disciplinary boundaries if they are entering into litigating on environmental issues. So that is why, if you look to these Johannesburg Principles or international developments, there is a lot of emphasis that is coming around the world. We need specialist people. We need specialism. We need rationalization. Because understanding these issues is not easy. It is very easy to say, Article 21, human rights violation, right to life. But how do you draw the complexities together? How do you interpret the science behind that? Science is very debatable. What you see, science is always open to challenges and experimentation. You may get one result today, but tomorrow that result will change. And that is where the complexity of the entire matter comes into picture. Today we are talking about pollution. We do not know what is the impact which is going to be 20 years down the line. It may have a very different kind of an impact. Just to contextualize within COVID, we have had this COVID. We've had these COVID jabs. All these vaccines have gone into our body. These were emergency kind of efforts which was done. But trust me, I am more worried about you people rather than my people of my age. Because 20 years down the line, we do not know how it is going to impact on your bodies and on the systems. And that's exactly what environment or climate does. Because COVID was emergency, so we were trying to save our lives, so we have that. But then these are matters which cannot be decided in a single day. And we need that sort of a specialism that has to come through. Similarly, the Global Judges Program, Klaus Stoffer, the CEO of the UNEP program, also talked about the importance of specialized judiciary. If we need to have environmental governance, which is transparent, which is accountable, which is fair in nature, it's important that we must have judges who have the ability to handle these matters. Because it's all about, we talk about these principles. I will also be talking about these principles of sustainable development, environment, economics, and social. But balancing these issues is not easy. This balancing only comes when we can understand. And the first thing that needs to be done is understanding the issues. Once we understand the issues, what I mean to say is once the judges understand the issues, that's when you start talking about justice. What happens in a situation, a judge is hearing the matter, but he still can't get his head right the corner. How is this waste going to impact on a third party or over the future thing? So that is why it is very important that we have very specialized and very keen, analytical, critically analytical judges who look into the matter. In addition to what I've mentioned, there are other conventions or agreements or global instruments where the importance of specialized judiciary has been highlighted. Part 2 of the Rio Declaration talks about it. Putrajaya statement from Malaysia talks about it. Nairobi's statement, First African Colloquium, talks about it. UN Assembly Environmental talks about it. Sustainable Development Goals talk about it under Goal 16. So you have so many instruments which are talking about the importance of specialized judiciary. Coming specifically to the Asian sector, let's move from international to regional and then to local, that's our national. In the Asian sector, the Asian Development Bank is playing a very important role in promoting green justice through knowledge sharing and capacity building. And I think that is very important. We need to learn from each other rather than thinking we know everything. So today when I'm talking to you, I'm also learning. Yesterday I learned a lot from you people. And I think that sort of a communication is so important in these sort of issues where you are not talking about the present, but you're talking about the future generations. There's a lot of responsibility on us. There's a lot of responsibility where we need to think, what sort of judgments do we want? Are judges capable of giving us the same? And that is where Asian Development Bank is playing a very important role in this regard. For example, I've given some figures. Asian Development Bank research shows that in the Asian region, we've lost about 18 million hectares of forest due to deforestation and due to forest fires. In the financial terms, it amounts to $4.5 trillion US, which has an impact on people as well as environment. Asia's mountains and ecosystems are affected very badly. Uttarakhand is a classic example of how our lives have got affected due to that. Freshwater environments are threatened by dams, we know. There's a huge lot of literature which is very debatable whether we should have dams or we should not have dams. And if we should have dams, what sort of dams should we be establishing? Coastal and marine ecosystems are very badly affected. Biodiversity is affected. So if you look into it, the biodiversity's value is somewhere between 10 billion to 23 billion annually. It's a huge amount of figure which we are talking about. So by and large, we can say that Asian region, which has got the, one of the finest flora and fauna, has been very massively affected as a consequence of environmental and climate degradation. The Asian Development Bank is really committed, and I think you people, whether online and in person, you must explore the possibility of interning with them. They have a lot of opportunities coming out, and you can explore that. So the Asian Development Bank is always insisting on improving the design of legal, regulatory, and enforcement capacities of institutions, including the judiciary. Because of this sort of a drive that is being taken, in 2012, there was a declaration which came known as the Burban Declaration. Burban is an area in Pakistan, so that was where the declaration came about. And there it was strongly suggested an educated judiciary and specialized courts, a commitment to establish green judiciary. Commitment is not about what you talk, it's real commitment, right? It should not be only to enhance your reputation, but you're really enviro-friendly in nature, and that is what is needed. Strengthening the existing environmental codes, developing an action plan for the development and compliance of laws, and training judges and lawyers. And they have been doing a lot of programs in relation to training of judges and lawyers. There is a network known as AJNE, which is basically Asian Judges Network on Environment. It has been in existence since 2010, and they have had a lot of capacity building programs where the lawyers and the judges from the region interact with each other. So it's a sort of a trans-governmental network which has been established for the purposes of judicial capacity building and exchange of ideas in environmental adjudication. If you look to the Asian region, we've got the ASEAN and we've got the SAARC. So there are two regions which are operating. And within the ASEAN region and within the SAARC region, there are lots and lots of programs that are happening where judges and lawyers and academics and sometimes students mix together to deliberate on this issue. And the whole idea is essentially to extend the knowledge beyond their national jurisdiction. If you confine yourself, for the last 30 years, I've always said, you should be a national player, but you should also have an international presence. And now with Bar Council of India changing and with foreign services coming into picture, start thinking big. If you think big, you make it big. If you think small, you remain small. And environmental issues are global. So having a presence is so important because India plays a very important role at the global level. And perhaps this course might be able to, don't think you only want a certificate, but think about where can you place yourself in your career trajectory and use this course for your own enhancement. You enhance yourself, but you also contribute in that way to the wider society. So that is why it's important that even the judiciary should not confine itself to the national jurisdictions. It should go beyond and start learning from other jurisdictions also. This sort of capacity building, this sort of networking, this sort of exchange of information is so important because you start thinking about how to bring about a change in relation to harmonizing the laws as well as implementing the laws in an effective manner. And what is more important is that in this kind of a situation, the efforts of organizations like Asian Development Bank are actually they are trying to have transjudicial communication, talking to one another globally. Just think about it. You talk to one another, you have more ideas coming out. And that's exactly what is happening in these kind of programs. So the word which is used in this sort of a situation is, it's a cross-fertilization of ideas. You have having a lot of ideas coming out because the nature of environmental problems are same. It may be different, it may have a different kind of an impact, but problem will always be complex, will always be polycentric, will always be transnational, and will always be political in nature throughout the world. So what you are trying to say is that you're trying to find solutions. You talk to one another, and you know that. You may be talking when you prepare for your exams, when you discuss with each other, there's more clarity. And the same happens for the judges when they start talking to each other. Because what you are doing is, you're promoting better environmental decisions. You're coming out with good practices. You're trying to look into the problem and trying to find solutions to those problems. Please remember, this is one of the things which I find quite challenging. I do not know how your universities tackle, but I've really come across a lot of academic literature as well as students writing. We want to do a comparative analysis. And what they start doing is India versus USA, India versus UK, India versus Australia. But they never do a comparison India versus Pakistan, India versus Bangladesh, India versus Malaysia, India versus Brazil. Why? We don't have to learn from the West. The Western problems are extremely different, whereas our socio-cultural problems are very different. That is the reason why organizations like ADB are trying to strengthen the regional impact. We need to learn from each other. Oranges cannot be compared to apples or vice versa. We need to compare similar with similar to find solutions to the problem. And that is where the doctrine of functionality comes into picture. So if anyone is doing research on comparative law, please look into the doctrine of functionality, because that's where we are saying similar situations, similar challenges, we need to understand. Yes, the West can provide us with certain guidelines. We can look into those models, but those models have to be turned and twisted as per our socio-economic conditions. And that's where, within the Asian region, this sort of an interaction, a cross-fertilization of ideas is very, very helpful. We come into situations where we start looking, oh, this is a good practice. Oh, this is a better one which we can use. And this is very helpful for systems where environmental law is in its embryonic stages, or the institutions are very slow to respond to environmental crisis. Such kind of interaction always is helpful in the content and design of national environmental laws. Here I've taken some examples. The adoption of precautionary principle. Indonesia and Pakistan started with it, and throughout the Asian region we have this. I do have a reservation on precautionary principle, I'll come. I have reservation in everything, but still I teach it. You similarly have polluter pays principle. India started the lead with it, and South Africa took it. Intergenerational equities first came from Philippines. Public trust doctrine came from Sri Lanka. And what we have done is, we have adopted this suiting our own Indian system. And that's the beauty of, transmigration of principles taking place. How nice is that, One country takes, the other judiciary starts thinking about it, and we start transposing. Because all of us have similar problems. So the point which I'm making is that this kind of cross-fertilization of ideas is extremely helpful when we are thinking about developing our own environmental jurisprudence through specialized courts and tribunals. What it does is, it actually fosters a pluralistic and contextualized understanding about the challenges of environmental law, the problems of environmental law, and dispensation of environmental justice. So that is why such kind of specialized environmental courts and tribunals are very important to deliver just and equitable outcomes, right? So, to just sum it up in one line, what I have argued is that internationally there is a lot of movement going on, and what we need is definitely such kind of specialized environmental courts and tribunals, right? Now I have one participatory exercise for you people before I delve into it. We'll give you 15-20 minutes to look into this one. And the same is for online students. Today we don't have any groups, but you people, there's an option for online students. The first one being, you can raise your hands and you can speak, introduce yourself and speak. And the second one is, if you don't want to speak, put it in the chat and someone will be reading your comments and but do identify yourself. Now the participatory exercises, please identify and discuss the possible advantages and disadvantages of environmental courts and tribunals. We give you the option, if you only want to talk about disadvantages, talk about disadvantages. If you want to talk about advantages, talk about that. And if you want to have a blend of both, please go ahead with that, right? So time, 20 minutes? We can give 20 minutes for this one. So it's about 15:37. So I think 5 to 4, we can come together and start discussing, right? So your time starts now. Thank you. Online people and in person, if you have any questions, please do ask us. If you have a problem for the question, just let us know about it and we can clarify. Thank you. If you want to work individually, you can do that. If you want to work collectively, in person or online, it's up to you. Very happy for any format which you want to adopt, right? Talk to each other. Cross fertilization of ideas is very important.
for online participants, if you are at a place where you can actually switch on your cameras, uh, be with us with your cameras on so that we can at least know who the participants have been. We can recognize the faces the participants. I'm not insisting on it, but try to. The foreign expert would feel indulged if she'll be interacting with the face.
Right, so we can start now, and we'll start first with some online, participants who could just share, what they feel about the advantages and disadvantages of environmental courts and tribunals. Anybody who would like to take the lead, if you can, as what Dr. Pandey has said, if you would like, please switch on the cameras. It would be nice to see your faces also. Or if you are, it's up to you, no pressures. But anyone who would like to take the lead on this one. Anyone online? Hello, there's Sandeep, right? Is it Sandeep? We can't hear you. Please go ahead. Anyone who would like to share, answers to this question? Yes, Shubham, would you like to start with it? You've got your hand raised. Tejaswini also. Yep. Please go ahead, somebody. Would anyone like to take the lead? Is voice, can you people hear us? Can you people online participants, can you hear us? Would you like to take the lead in answering the question? Please unmute the mic, whoever wants to speak.
Please unmute it from your side. We have opened the
Yeah.
channel for communication. Please unmute it from your side.
Please unmute it. I can see you, Shubham. Could you unmute your mic? Yes. Would you like to take the lead? Muted. We can't hear you. We can't hear you at the moment.
Let's give logistics
Okay,
5 minutes.
we'll
deal
give
with the issue and
we'll
that
give
way-
logistics 5 minutes to sort this out, and in the meantime we'll have in-house people talking about it. Right. Here you go. Who wants to take the lead?
Ma'am, my name is Shubham. I'm pursuing PhD in sociology.
Just bear with us, online people, because there's a problem here. We'll try to sort it out, and then we will get back to you in 5 minutes. All right? Yeah.
it working?
Ma'am, I'm Shubham.
Okay, we'll just take Shubham now and in person, and then we'll come back to online. Okay, just take 1 minute, 1.5 minutes to sum up what you think.
Ma'am, the exercise was to discuss about the advantages and disadvantages of environmental courts and tribunals. Ma'am, in my point of view, advantages are like it would be a specialized court. It would gather some special attention of the local people as well as the nation, as well on a national level, on national scale. Ma'am, the autonomy of the power would be great because it would incorporate all the other environmental associations, Paryavarana Ayog, and each and every department, and it will be helpful for the protection of environment in any way, jal, thal, vayu, soil, water, or any noise pollution, even anything, any type of pollution, or this environmental. Ma'am, the power center would be related. Ma'am, we can make tribunals and courts on both state as well as national level, which will gather the knowledge from the local people over there who are residing in the particular area where we have problem, and then we can suggest them the best possible solution. And ma'am, we can also establish grievance cell in each and every district and taluk and tehsils and other smaller units of administration, which will be very sort of easy for people. शिकायत पेटिका, which will we will suggestions and कि हमारे यहाँ ऐसी समस्याएं हैं, we can do it, we can preserve our environment, we can safeguard our sanctuaries and other flora and faunal web. And ma'am, on the same disadvantages which I think I'm able to recognize is that it would be it would be again influenced by the government officials, which will not clear the picture which is present at the site. They will depict some another, because मैम अगर हम कहीं पे कोई चीज़ रोकते हैं तो कहीं पे किसी और चीज़ को शुरुआत भी देते हैं. If we are stopping a development, like suppose we are in Lucknow Development Authority is organizing some dam for some कोई आयोजन करा रहे हैं. They are organizing a seminar. For that we have to cut trees. We have to मतलब ma'am resources we have to gather there. And ma'am, another thing is that if I take especially the example of Lucknow, the special economic zones like the industrial areas which are set up, ma'am, we set up on the basis of availability of raw material, communication, poor labor, and these are the some factors which are compulsory or very important. But in that light, if we are thinking about development and profit, or economical profit, or anyhow, ma'am, we are harming the nature. Definitely we are harming the nature in any sense. तो मैम I don't think कि हम दोनों चीज़ों को साथ में कर सकते हैं. कोई भी पक्षी एक पर से उड़ नहीं सकता, उसी तरह हम एक ही साथ दोनों चीज़ों को लेकर के नहीं मतलब अपने तो disadvantages would be like we can never define, ma'am, the very first day you talked about justice and injustice. So ma'am, we can never define justice and injustice with a same singular thing. किसी का हित किसी का अहित तो होगा. तो in that, and if we will, ma'am, set up specific tribunals and courts, ma'am, we will also create a chaos and rivalry between the departments. तो जो मूल तत्व है, जो मतलब मेन प्रॉब्लम है, वो कभी आगे नहीं आ पाएगी. वो चीज़ दूसरी आएगी और वर्तमान में जो स्थिति वहाँ पर होगी वो अलग होगी. The problem would be another, and the solution which we will मतलब take up to the epics to the judges or the chairman of the tribunal or court anywhere, he will get some another thing. पानी मतलब पेड़ कट रहा है वो नहीं पहुँचेगा. पेड़ कटने के फायदे क्या हैं वो पहुँचेंगे वहाँ तक. तो फिर वो थोड़ा सा मैम कम्युनिकेशन वो हाँ तो.
Thank you. Some points very well raised, which we will sum up later. Now I go back to the online people. Anyone who wants to take the initiative And if you want to switch on your cameras, please go ahead. We'll have 2 people from online at the moment, and then we'll get back to in person. Anyone taking the initiative? Go ahead, Shubham, right? Yes, please. Go ahead, please. Anyone else who would like to contribute online? We'll take one more participant. Okay, then we can have 2 at the moment, and then we'll go back to it. It is, yeah, that's great. So who wants to, Tejaswini, do you want to take, and then we get back to Kuldeep, right? Okay, Tejaswini, please go ahead. Thank you so much, and I think that resonates with the point which Shubham in person has also raised, the conflict which comes between different agencies or the judges in relation to adjudicating on that matter, right? Thank you so much. Could we have Kuldeep now, please? Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Thank you, Kuldeep. That was that's fine. We'll give you 1 minute because we've got time limitation. So thank you so much for highlighting the advantages. Now we go to in person. Anyone who would like to take the lead? We'll have two people and then we'll come back to online.
शुरू है okay yeah okay so I'll be very quick in the advantages first we look at quicker resolution because these cases are not lying in the same heaps that other cases are mixed with each other in our common courts. And moving on, then everyone has talked about the specialized solutions because of the expertise of the judges and the lawyers. um, Another one which has been pointed out is the attention on national level to big issues. Yeah, and sensitize judges to understand environmental issues better. They are more equipped than other judges. They have better knowledge and deeper understanding to resolve these issues. So that is in one way very advantageous. Also, this is a direct place to approach to for resolution of environmental disputes. You don't have to go anywhere else. This is your first stop whenever there's an environmental dispute. Now, also looking at adoption of best practices internationally becomes easier and it impacts positively because these people are knowledgeable. They know about what is going on in the world, and as you have talked about just right now, that exchange happens through communication, through conventions and forums. So these judges, they will have access to such places and they will bring the best practices to our country and adopt them according to our system and customs. Also, one more which I would like to point out is that concerned citizens can collectivize to push for environmental justice when there is a specialized authority like this, like these courts. So many citizens, we already in India have citizen groups who take very who are very active in environmental issues. So when they collectivize on some issues, they have more power, and this is a platform for them to push on these issues. Um, Now these are the advantages. On the disadvantage part, I have not been able to point out many, but maybe one will be the challenge of enforcement when there is Supreme Court above them.
Right.
So because their judgments will be subject to Supreme Court's approval if someone goes for a special leave petition, for example. So that may be a slight disadvantage. Right. Nothing else I have been able to point out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you people had this. So could you highlight some disadvantages? We've heard about advantages.
Yes, if I may add one more advantage, which I think is different from what others have pointed out. So everybody talked about the specialized and the expertise and the experts that would be appointed. Other than that, I feel people from NGOs and international organizations can also take part. And we have an example of one of the best practices that is there in Latin America and the Caribbean. UN rights experts have been appointed to governments or to give their suggestions with regard to environment issues. And secondly, I feel a lot of environment issues are transboundary and transnational in nature, which involves a lot of indigenous peoples a lot of times, which involves the migratory species a lot of times. And when these indigenous...
And the water, right?
Yes.
India, Bangladesh, right? That's a
Right.
huge India-Pakistan. That's a huge transboundary conflict that is going, and we don't have answers to that.
Right. So in case we end up having these environment courts and tribunals, so a lot of these locus standi issues will also be resolved. However, when we come to the challenges, the main challenge we have is, for instance, the Rio Declaration of 1992 was very visionary. The Earth Summit was extremely visionary. It still has some of the principles which are extremely relevant even today. However, the problem, as everybody else pointed out, lies with the implementation. So in case we want to have a, a mechanism where environment courts and tribunals are established, we need to have we need to have an umbrella legislation which is universally binding on most of the countries. And here the main challenge is again with regards to the signing and ratification. So a lot of countries might not agree to it. And for instance, as we have the International Criminal Court, we have the Rome Statute in place, but US and a lot of other countries are still not cooperating because it functions on the principle of complementarity. And what we would need would be the principle of universality for all the other countries to step up and contribute it.
And in addition to that, this is a huge contention. So you raise a point which is very important at the international level, because that's a huge contention. Can we have an international court of environment? It's quite debatable, because there are, under the International Criminal Court, there are questions about refugees and stuff like that which has come, or ecocide that are coming up, and we do not have at the moment definitive answers to that. So that's a good point. I'll stop here because I've got another exercise coming up, and problem is time, but I want you people to be engaged. But I must congratulate all of you. Well done. Well done. Excellent work, because you've really pointed out what are the main issues that are involved, the advantages and disadvantages. And may I request Dr. Malai Pandey to please circulate the slides if it's helpful. So the disadvantages, which are, I'm just talking about, maybe the generalist judges in ordinary courts lack sufficient support, experience. They're uncomfortable in dealing because they don't understand. Simple as that. They don't understand these issues, and they can't then dispense away with environmental justice. We know that there are delays in the court, definitely. The principle of Jardine versus Jardine really works well, particularly in the Indian setup. Court cases are clogging and clogging and clogging, and that is where the Chief Justice of India has often raised this issue about how to deal with it. Marginalization. If environment is not in the stream, there is marginalization of environmental issues. Sometimes there is a challenge that there is an insufficient caseload, cost is too high. Defining environment and environmental disputes is yet again another one. And that goes down to the very question that, do judges understand that, right? So the training element is there. And Tejaswini raised the question of judicial activism and bias, which is very much inherent, because as judges are humans, and judges will take a bias or will have their own subjective opinion. So think about it. If you were deciding a matter, your likes and dislikes are going to be so strong that it becomes very difficult to differentiate on these aspects. Advantages are huge. There's expertise. You people have all discussed. Expertise, efficiency in quicker decisions, standing is generalized, there's less of cost, there's commitment. Commitment is very important. If you're not committed, you cannot strongly 100% say that please take up or protect environment. Creativity. Somebody raised development of environmental jurisprudence. But more importantly, the decisions are scientifically legal in nature. The dimension of decision making is changing, and I'll come to that, how NGT has done that. And that is what the beauty of environmental decision making comes up in specialized courts. There's uniformity and consistency in principles. New procedural practices are evolved. Public participation, somebody talked about. Society, Shubham, you raised this point about societal groups coming into picture, civil society playing a part, and again, judicial activism or proactive. But I would read it as more as proactive rather than, I don't like using the word activism. It's a negative connotation. So I'll use the word proactive. So definitely, this is how it is. Roy model in today's time. It says it is very important that we should have specialized environmental courts and tribunals in order to achieve ecological sustainable development. So if we have specialized courts, it will deliver consistency in decision making, will decrease the delays, there will be development of environmental laws, policies and principles. In today's time, he is one of the finest judges in the world who's coming out with amazing judgments in relation to environmental and climate change issues. As far as moving on to the next one, there are more advantages of having these courts rather than disadvantages. So what has happened? The trend has changed. And globally, we see glorification of these environmental courts and tribunals taking place. Pring and Pring, Mrs. Pring is not there, she died last year in 20. They came out with a UNEP report in 2016, to which I contributed, and at that time, there were 350 environmental courts and tribunals in 41 countries in 2016. In 2021, UNEP has come out with another report, which was initiated by National University Singapore. Again, I contributed. And now we have 2,116 environmental courts and tribunals in 67 countries. So there's a huge rise that is taking place. There are different models which are coming up. Please note, there are two words that are being used. One is environmental court and one is environmental tribunal. There's a difference. There's absolutely a difference. And there are different models that are coming for courts and different models that are coming for tribunals. For the courts, one are fully independent environmental courts like New Zealand, Australia, Brazil, and they are of a high court or a Supreme Court status. So they are of that level. They are of Supreme Court status, which are very much independent. Second one they are courts, they are part of a traditional court, but they develop their own procedures. So they are independent, but they fit into that system. Like you have Australia from Queensland, and you have state of Vermont in US. The third one is, they are independent courts, but they are a mix of science judges and legal judges. Together, they are sitting. No difference. That you get it in Sweden. The fourth kind of a court is, generalist judges are sitting, and they are deciding about environmental courts. You know, sitting in Supreme Court and deciding, like Philippines and in the state of Hawaii in US. And you also have generalist judges who are trained in environmental law in Indonesia. Please note, Indonesia does not have an environmental court, but we've added this because they are training the judges. That is why that model is there, that they train. But there is no environmental court, no environmental tribunal in Indonesia. Environmental tribunals are different. Now the question is, are tribunals separate, independent, or they are supplementary? And every country has a different way of looking into it. So you have operational, separate, and fully independent tribunals like Kenya and Japan. You also have environmental tribunals which are under the supervisory control of the government, but they cannot review the legislation which has made them. Something similar to our administrative tribunal jurisprudence. So we have India, Canada, the province of Ontario, New York City, Environmental Control Board. So they are independent, they are under the control, but they cannot review the parent legislation which has created them. And you also have captive environmental tribunals which are absolutely under the control of the government. They do what the government wants them to do, and they tow away with the policy that the government is propagating. So Environmental Appeal Board is a classic example from USA. So there are different models operating. Please remember that no one size fits everyone. We keep on tinkering, we keep on changing. And some of the examples which I've taken are from developed countries and developing, and I'll come to the Asian region. Australia's, as I said, it's the Land and Environmental Court. It's considered, it was established in 1980. It's the Rolls-Royce model. The finest, the best one with the best practices it has. And it has twin objective. One is rationalization. It is one-stop shop for everything. Criminal, civil, everything administrative, it handles the matter. And the planning matters, environmental matters, land matters, everything it does. And the second one is specialization. The judges have specialism, and they are being supported from outside by the commissioners. And these commissioners are people who are having knowledge and experience in matters relating to environmental sciences, land valuation, architecture, heritage, building construction, planning, everything. So the judges are being supported in their judicial decision making by these experts in that regard. As I said, it has a very wide jurisdiction. It covers land, it covers criminal side, it covers, environmental jurisdiction. It's a superior court of record with merit review. So it has the status of Supreme Court, which we identify. They have the concept of multi-door courthouse, alternative dispute resolution. Many of the cases are settled through ADR, right? And presently, as the research shows, there are 1,400 cases per year which this court entertains. That's a huge number, and a lot of them go through mediation and arbitration. There's a very good, efficient case management system, very well-developed technology provisions, and the fundamental rule is that the disputes have to be settled. But settling of disputes have to be having just and equitable outcomes. Another one is New Zealand on similar lines. It's a freestanding, and again, one of the oldest freestanding courts, and or it's a Mercedes, or it's a Jaguar. So that's sort of a status this court has. It has 9 fully trained lawyers and 15 environmental commissioners. And again, it relies very heavily on alternative dispute resolution. And use of technology is very much there. So it's about tracking cases, interactive website, video and phone conferencing, and above all, e-filing. Sweden is a different model from Europe, and in Sweden, it has a mix of both the judicial members and the technical members, scientific members, sitting together. And what they do is they look into the cases. These judges are of a homologous standing. They are of equal standing, which our National Green Tribunal has followed. You will come across a lot of literature in newspapers that scientific judges don't do anything in the NGT. I will give you a very different picture of what is happening in the NGT, right? Jurisdiction again is huge. It is planning, real estate. Environmental crimes are excluded. So they do not cover criminal jurisdiction. But importantly, one thing which all these people do, these judges do, is on-site investigation. So it is not simply adversarial, it is inquisitive and investigative in nature, right? So different models coming up. UK, it was the first country in the world to talk about environmental tribunals, environmental courts, but unfortunately, the Britishers are having a very different approach, which is cautious, pragmatic, learning from experience, yet containing element of radical vision. But they are not radical in nature. So what they have done is, instead of forming a specialized environmental court or tribunal, they have a tier system So they've introduced a tier within their already working system of tribunals, with civil sanctions coming into picture. And there are acts under which this tier will be examining the jurisdiction. Criminal matters are not included within this, and the tribunal consists of judicial and non-judicial members. Developing countries, Malaysia is a very good example. It was established in 2012. I'm just taking you, and you'll get the slides. Prior to 2016, there were 42 sessions and 53 magistrate courts, and they entertained the matter under 38 ordinances and 17 regulations only with respect to criminal cases. But in 2021, they changed it, and now all civil matters are also included. So Malaysia has both civil and criminal side. And presently there are 134 environmental courts operating in Malaysia. It's a very expansive jurisdiction because it includes crime and civil, and it also deals with air pollution, water pollution, industrial effluents, wildlife offenses against wildlife conservation. So it's huge jurisdiction which they are having. Kenya is again very good, and we need to learn from these countries, right? And we must take pride in the fact that NGT is considered as a very good role model for developing countries. I'll come to that later. Kenya has got the Environmental and Land Court. It's got a presiding judge who sits, at the moment it's Justice Oscar Angote. He sits in Nairobi, and he is being supported by other judges. And there are 27 environmental courts throughout the country with 51 judges. It has got huge jurisdiction, original and appellate. But please note, Kenya is a country where land plays a very important role because of its tribal population, right? Unfortunately, when I was discussing with the judges, unfortunately, they don't have environmental courts. What the disputes they have are land disputes. Compulsory land acquisition, compensation cases, public acquisition of land, land administration and management. And that's one of the biggest challenges which Kenya is facing at this time. Environment is not per se on top of it, because land is, because it's directly related to lives and livelihood, right? So that is where they are facing the challenge, because they want to expand environment, but they can't, despite the fact that environment is the first word in the legislation and land is the second one. So that's the tragedy which Kenya is facing. And that's why they are saying, how do we define environment and environmental disputes? But Kenya is also using ADR, and they are using the principles of intergenerational, intragenerational polluter pays principle. They also have a national environmental tribunal, but this tribunal is exclusively under the control of the government. So it has got a very limited jurisdiction, and any matter which comes from tribunal goes to the Environment and Land Court. Now I have a very small exercise where I will only give you 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes, 15 let's put it. These are the SAARC countries, right? I don't want all of you to pick up every country, but pick up one country or two countries where you can find the environmental courts, because this is very close to us. We are a part of SAARC. And in your answers, please do not come to India. Do not discuss India. Exclude India. We know we have NGT. But look into the other countries as to whether we have any tribunal or not. You've got 12 minutes to do it, and there we go, right?
Shubham had a curiosity question. Yes, ma'am. We at the end of the session we can text it.
I think we take the questions later and we do that. Right, guys, we are back now. So, uh, welcome back, online people. So, let's start with it. You've got 1.5 minutes to pick up any country or countries which you think are having this thing or having environmental courts or tribunals in the SAARC region. And the reason why I've really picked up this exercise is because all these countries have similar kind of socio-economic challenges, similar kind of problems, but the variation, the models could be very different. So anyone from online who would like to take the lead, and if you feel comfortable, please switch on your cameras. Right, go ahead please. Anyone? We've got Sujit. Hello Sujit, how are you? Mhm. Okay. Right. Thank you, Sujit. Thank you so much for your input. I'll come back to you when I will be touching Pakistan. Right? Thank you. Anybody else online who would like to contribute? Anyone? Chandresh, right? Am I correct in pronouncing your name? Chandresh, would you like to speak? Right, if you're still there, we can wait for a second, otherwise we'll come back to you. Right, let's go back now to in-house participants. Anybody who would like to take the lead on this?
I'm Fasia Khatun, and I have read about the environment protection tribunals in Pakistan. So they have four environment law tribunals in Lahore, Karachi, Peshawar, and Quetta, and they came after the Environment Protection Act of 1997. So they have this law at the national level, which is the Environment Protection Law of 1997, and thereafter they had these four tribunals in the year, I think, 2010. And apart from this, they have provincial environment protection laws also in the regions of Punjab, Sindh, Khyber, Pakhtunkhwa, and Balochistan. So they have a specialized tribunal.
Thank you. And anyone else from online? Sure, please go ahead.
Ma'am, the four environment protection tribunals, they have one presiding chairperson and other than him, there is one technical member and one legal member. And the appeals from these tribunals lies to the High Court of Pakistan, and mainly, if we see the big matters of environmental matters are mainly decided by the high courts and supreme courts only in Pakistan. One more thing, other than the environmental protection tribunals, there is also provision for an environmental magistrate, uh, and this environmental magistrate, the appeal to his decisions lies to the sessions courts in Pakistan. So he's quite low in the hierarchy, if we see, and he basically exclusively deals with motor waste and hazardous material cases. Everything else is in the court of the environmental protection tribunals. So yeah, I
Thank
had to
you.
clarify that
It's
thing.
quite, comprehensively, you both of you have covered. Anyone else? Yeah, please take the mic. We've covered
Uh,
Pakistan. Any other country?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. He's, yeah, go ahead.
So, ma'am, we have dealt with Bhutan, and it's a landlocked country, and it is one of the smallest among the SAARC nations, and it has the highest proportion of forest cover in Asia, that is 72%. So. It had a law which was made in 2007, which is known as National Environment Protection Act of 2007, and under it they had the which deals with the legal framework for environment protection, and under it they formed an authority which is called National Environment Commission, and this is the highest decision making body in the matters related to environment, and it almost deals with all the matters of the violation and relate which are related to environment. And these NEC also deals with the development of policies and programs, and it also monitors the compliance of these environmental laws. Apart from this, in 2015, so Bhutan officially announced that it had the plans to create a green bench in the High Court of Bhutan, which is specific for the purpose of environmental cases. And it so the drafting of the rules and the procedure for this green bench is still going on, and it has not been achieved yet.
Thank you so much. I'll update you on that. Right? The next one, please. Somebody's.
Ma'am, this is Shambhunath Mishra, PhD research scholar of this esteemed university itself. I did research in Maldives. So they have this Environment Protection and Preservation Act of 1993. They are very much dependent upon the business of tourism. So they have a number of laws on coral mining of 1978, and then laws on fisheries of 87. In this act, they have mandated two ministries of sorry, planning, human rights and environment, along with Ministry of Population and Environment. These two are exercising some civil jurisdiction by the way of panel heading. So they have they exercise civil jurisdiction, and they leave hefty penalties of around 100 million rupees, which equivalent to 200 million US dollars. But they do not have a separate setup of the environmental codes in them.
Thank you very much. You, you take.
Actually, ma'am, I only found that
Please introduce yourself
my,
first.
my name is Vipin, and I think Bangladesh is the only nation state in South Asia which established environmental code here.
Thank you so much. Anyone from online who would like to contribute? Good evening. Thank you so much. And I hope that you are enjoying the course, right? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thanks. That's very nice of you and very kind of you. I am very happy. Right. Yeah. Okay. Uh, Anybody else from online, or should I just sum it up now? Anybody in person who would like to start? Right. So let me, yeah, please go ahead. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. That's really informative. I did not know about it, but certainly that's a very good point, because civil society really makes an impact and in trying to promote, environmental justice. Thank you so much. That's really learning for me too. Thank you. Thank you everyone for doing this exercise, and now you can see that we don't have so much of material on SARC countries. We have everything else, but we don't have SARC. So, a pointer towards you is start working on the Asian side rather than looking at the global north. We have lots and lots of talent, and we should take that talent forward, right? Now, you have covered most of the countries, but unfortunately, Nepal and Sri Lanka, nobody touched. I will be touching. But there is some material which you have highlighted, but I'll give you a little bit of update as to what is happening. Afghanistan is in crisis. War, civil unrest, severe economic problems, environment is not a priority, right? The Taliban does not even think about these issues. So they do not have environmental courts or tribunals, but it is so important that 80% of the population is dependent on countries' natural resources. But there is so much of resource degradation that has taken place due to civil unrest that environmental resource policies are not being implemented. So when you do not have it as a priority, environment is not a priority, you can't think about an institutional setup coming into picture. So unfortunately, there is no environmental court or tribunal. They do have an act, Environmental Management Act, which talks about promoting environmental integrity, resource conservation, management of these resources. But then the crises that the country is undergoing, the conflict, the severe economic problem does not prioritize environment. So it's a no-no. Bangladesh, people have touched on to it. Bangladesh is a country which is now fully aware because of climate change impact. The vulnerability of climate change is massive. So vulnerability is not simply about the hazard. It's also relational in nature in terms of how individuals and societies, particularly the coastal societies, are getting affected by it. As stated by you, they passed the Environment Court Act of 2010, and they established an environmental court in each of the 64 districts, and they also have environmental appellate courts. But only at the moment, there are 4 operational environmental courts. But these environmental courts are within the system itself. They haven't, set up separate institutional bodies, but they work within the ordinary courts. They also have an environmental code for crime where they look into Environmental Conservation Act. They have technical experts which help, but they are not too much into it. But one of the things which the Bangladesh court has done is, and I think where NGT has gone wrong, I will come to that later, is they introduced the requirement of advance notice. That is, if you are going to file a case, you have to give an advance notice. That advance notice will go to the inspector of the Department of Environment, and he or she will look into the matter whether they have responded to that or not. Now, that's a sort of a discouragement for ordinary people to take up their case. Unfortunately, NGT also adopted, during the regime of former chairperson Adarsh Kumar Goyal. We have a new chairperson, so we don't know because he came from September. Maybe he does away with that. But during the regime of former chairperson Swatantru Kumar, this sort of a requirement was not there. People were given the leverage. Come, talk to us. And I think that was it. And I think this advance notice, personally speaking, I feel that this is a kind of a thing which demotivates people. The ministry will always say, yes, we've done it. But whether it's effectively, efficiently done is questionable. So the moment the ministry says, yes, we've done it, the matter finishes off. And sometimes the real environmental cases are not taken to a logical end. And I think that is where Bangladesh has missed the opportunity to take forward these cases, despite the fact that it is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world due to environment and climatic impacts. Bhutan, somebody asked me about Bhutan. It's a lovely country. You people must go there. It only has one green bench, which was established in 2015. It was to commemorate the 60th birth anniversary of the 4th king of Bhutan. They are very enviro-friendly people, right? You talked about them. So this green bench was not established prior to 2015, but now it has been established. It has its own procedures to provide for speedy trial, fair and just adjudication. There's a liberalization concept for standing, and they also have the ability, the bench has the ability to take help from the scientific or technical experts. Mind you, Bhutan is the country where people are very happy, people are very, very conscious of their environment, and that is why there are restrictions, tourism restrictions for people to enter into the country. I mean, for Indian passport holders, there's no problem, but for other Westerners, there is a problem which comes, and that is essentially because they want to protect their natural resources. But now they do have a green bench within the High Court, right? Maldives, it does not have an environmental court or tribunal, but they give preference to the constitutional mandates. So the constitutional provisions, and they talk about the fundamental duty of the citizen to protect and improve the environment, which is very similar to what we have in the Indian Constitution. They also talk about the state doing that, and they also talk about fostering an ecological, sustainable development. So through their court systems, they're using the constitutional mandates, but no specific or institutionalized environmental court or tribunal. As far as Nepal is concerned, there is no environmental court or tribunal. It's the Supreme Court of Nepal which takes the call, and they again use the same constitutional provisions of protecting and improving the environment. So it's the High Courts and the Supreme Courts which are dealing. Pakistan has, people have talked about it, and Pakistan has got the Pakistan Environmental Protection Act of 1997. Presently, they have 5 environmental tribunals. So it's not 4, but it is 5. And the chairperson is supplemented with technical member and other judges. And they also hear the appeals which come against the Environmental Protection Order. So appeals from this tribunal go to the High Court. But despite this institution, the power lies in the hands of the High Court and the Supreme Court. Because the High Court and the Supreme Courts use public interest litigation. They've really borrowed a lot. You know, these countries, SAARC countries, have really borrowed a lot from Indian jurisprudence. And there is a transmigration of ideas that takes place in that regard. And they are using public interest litigation as a very powerful tool to protect environment and climate. And they're using their constitutional mandates, right to life, right to, and all these international principles. And I think, personally, I think India has missed the opportunity for climate change. Justice Mansoor Ali Shah has taken the lead from these Asian countries to talk about climate change. We were always number 1 for environmental matters. I don't know why our judges have taken a backseat in that. Probably we keep on justifying we don't have a climate law, but these countries also don't have a climate law. They have used the constitutional provisions. We don't have very strong climate change judgments at the moment. What we are trying to read is within the environment, within the natural resources, within the Disaster Management Act. But we have not really come out with that. And at this time, because everything moves at the global level, Justice Mansoor Ali Shah's judgment, which he gave in State versus Lehgari, is cited everywhere in the world today. It's all about climate. And I think it's time for the Indian judiciary to pick up on this, because India is also very vulnerable to climate change, right? So that's one point I would like to make for Pakistan. But otherwise, these countries have taken from India. Sri Lanka, again, it does not have an environmental court or tribunal. Supreme Court plays a very important role, and Supreme Court is using the constitutional mandates to look into this. But importantly, they are also mixing human rights and social justice together. And that's what we talked day before yesterday, that the social justice is also a part of environmental justice. And again, use of PIL is massive. So what we are seeing in the SAARC region is that countries are using PIL as a weapon, as a strong weapon, as a wheel of transformation to talk about environmental justice, right? How effective it is, it's questionable. We can have a lot of debate on that, but then definitely there is something which is moving in that direction. So just to sum up today's lecture, there is no optimum one size that fits all. There are different models, different ways, and we are more driven by our own cultural, socio-economic conditions that are prevailing in every national jurisdiction. SAARC is an organization which has got more than 1.7 billion people, which account for 21% of the world's population. We've got massive, massive flora and fauna, but we also have challenges because the countries are poor too. So we've got issues about rapid economic growth, we've got poverty, and how do we attain sustainable development goals is yet another challenge which needs to be taken into account. But then despite that, judiciary, judges hold a position of reverence. And there's a lot of hope which people have if you try to compare it with the two other branches of the state. So definitely in our systems, judiciary works very well. And that is where the systems, the methods, the procedures, everything is different. And that's where we should be tackling to look into the best practices that are coming out of our systems. Needless to say, India is the first country from the developing world and the third country in the world to have a specialized, dedicated environmental tribunal. First in the developing countries and third in the world after Australia and New Zealand. And we should take pride because India has set up some of the very good practices depending on its own conditions and brought about the transformative change in environmental justice. It's very easy for us to say nothing is happening. But when you tread out, you see we are still better. So that is why I'm always reminded of that statement, no system is perfect, you make it better. With this, I finish off with today's lecture. Thank you to online participants, thank you to in-person participants, and from tomorrow onwards, I will start with India's National Green Tribunal. My idea is not to give you bookish knowledge, but it's to share. For the last 15 years, I've been working with this institution, closely with the judges, closely with the lawyers and the litigants, to give you a broader perspective about what is happening in that institution. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for an enlightening and thoughtful session. I have a small announcement to make before we close the session for today. Before that, if there are any questions from online or offline participants. Shubham had an invigilation duty lined up because of which he had to go.
Anyone online, if you have any questions, comments, or anything to share, which could be very helpful for all of us? In person? There's somebody online. Please introduce yourself. Yeah. Yes, we will be sharing everything. Yes, I've already asked Dr. Malai Pandey to share all the slides with you people. Yes, definitely. Malai, would you want to add something?
Are there any more questions or any curiosities from online participants?
Or something to share? We can learn.
The announcement being that we have common law admission test scheduled for 3rd of December, because of which we have been getting requests from majority of our PhD scholars who have been enrolled in the exam and some academicians who are part of the law fraternity to reschedule the timing of the lecture. And after long deliberation and with a foreign expert and with a due consent, we have rescheduled the lecture timings from tomorrow to 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. There would be a few lectures, few days. I guess tomorrow is a day where we'll be sitting from 10 to 1. Thereof, it would be a 2-hour frame. But from tomorrow onwards, it would be 10 to 12 to meet the requirement of center observers, those who need to go to their places, to meet the requirement of the duties which have been assigned to them under CLAT, or the workload the scholars are sharing when it comes to national universities. So I hope you all will be joining us tomorrow. The link would be shared around 9:30 to you. Thank you for being with us. That would be all from our side for today.